Staffing for summer camps, a hot button topic in 2021. Folks couldn't get staff, keep staff, or found the summer more draining than ever, helping staff make it through the season. This episode focuses on part one of our discussion on how we can give our staff the best experience possible and how that helps us deliver our best program ever.
Do you ever feel like you're spending so much time at the office that you have no time left for camp? With UltraCamp, you can track attendance, manage staff applications, and streamline registration so you'll be back outside in no time. Find out more at ultracampmanagement.com/campcode.
Welcome to Camp Code, a podcast brought to you by Go Camp Pro. We have created and are dedicated to this podcast because we believe that staff training is one of, if not the most important part of your job as a camp director. Staff training is what prepares your staff to care for the kids, to feel confident in their skills, to do their jobs to the best of their ability, and to learn along the way. A well thought out and intentional staff training will help you in more ways than you can imagine. And we need to help each other bring our very best. There are a lot of important topics to cover this season, and today we'll be focusing on a crucial one. But before we dive in, we're just going to take a quick moment and introduce ourselves. So Gabrielle, we'll start with you.
Well, my name is Gabrielle Rail, and I'm one of the camp directors of Camp Waro. And Camp Waro is an all-girls camp in the Laurentian Mountains of Quebec, Canada. And we focus on creating a positive community for gender minorities.
Thanks, Gabs. And I'm Beth Allison. I'm co-owner of Camp Hacker and Go Camp Pro. As a camp consultant and trainer, I build on my experience as a director and executive director and 44 summers at camp. And my passion is building solid, supportive, and purposeful communities through intentional and thoughtful leadership training. Now, you may have already noticed we are missing Ruby today. She is outside with outdoor ed students. So we're going to miss her terribly, but Gabs and I are going to do our best today and try to do her proud. Mm-hmm. So Ruby, we hope you're having a lot of fun with those kids. I know it's been a long time coming, and these events that you've been dealing with these last little bit have delayed a lot of your outdoor ed experience. So we're excited for you that you get to get out there and do that today. All right. So we are all well aware of the staffing issues that camps struggled with this summer. It was really rough for a lot of directors and their leadership teams. What we would like to discuss today is the fact that we don't think it was all due to COVID. We think in some ways COVID and all of its issues only exacerbated an already growing problem that we need to deal with. We need to put a ton of effort into staffing and hiring for this coming year. And we, of course, need to do it with great intention. So we're going to begin by hearing some pearls of wisdom from Gabrielle. Gabs, why are we having so much trouble finding staff, so much trouble holding on to staff, so much trouble getting through the summer with our staff? What's different?
I think COVID has ripped open the problems that are going on in our society and have helped individuals to reassess what matters to them. And I think that if you look at many organizations, doesn't matter what field you're in, people are rethinking, is this what I want to do with my life? And it's no longer, a year and a half ago, Beth, you and myself and Ruby were talking about, for staff to be committed, it has to matter and it has to have a long-term impact on the world. And that's what you need to do to keep your staff happy and engaged and growing and learning, etc.
Right.
And now that's still extremely important. But then the lens has shifted to a little bit back onto themselves and said, but what am I getting out of this? How is my time being respected? Am I resting enough? Am I getting paid enough? Am I being treated with the honor that I need to feel good about myself and not feel taken advantage of, your bosses? So it's not bad, but organizations, we need to rethink how we run, especially our summer camps.
Did you find staff more triggered this year than in past summers?
Yes. Yeah. And that's a good friend of ours that had talked about that on another podcast, that staff seem to be more triggered. And for me, that is 100% was my experience this summer. So I feel like we work really hard at Oro to create open communication, that we celebrate frustration in the form of coming forward. So when you're frustrated, that's not bad. That's actually exciting, because that's an opportunity to problem solve and make things better. And that has been working for us. It's still hard work, but that's always has made our organization better, and has always made the working conditions better for our staff. And certain things that I have said in the past that tend to unite our staff, this year I learned very rapidly that it was either taken out of context or it was simply triggering. I had said at one point to everybody that, just remember that this is a tough summer. And so, and when you're frustrated, either with yourself or somebody else, let's see if this is this because it's COVID, because it just sucks because we have to keep, our distance 6 feet apart and our masks. Just be kind to yourself and be kind to each other. And I had given an example, in past years, if there was a bunch of kids sitting, waiting to go, for example, sailing, and they're sitting there for 15 minutes waiting to get a sailboat, that wouldn't be really acceptable. But this year, I would love to just see kids waiting around for 15 minutes, sitting in the grass, chatting, while you take your time to figure out what sailboat you're going to give the kids. Let's have no pressure. And for me saying that, what was taken from that was, we're not allowed to complain about anything because it's COVID camp. And obviously that's not what I meant, but I really had to learn that, my team is hurting. They are struggling and they feel so raw, and their nerves are just exposed. And so it was a big learning curve for me, and it was holding a lot of feelings and a lot of anger.
And I think it's one of those things that, like we've said for 8 seasons now, and at every conference we speak at and master classes that we run, front load, front load, front load. We talk about it all of the time. And I think this year's lesson is, you front loaded with your staff saying, taking the pressure off, all those kinds of things. But we now have to add, and if you have any concerns about it, or if you have any, you need to come and talk to us. This is not the end of it. We can still have discussions. And I think you implied that, but they didn't infer it. So we need to be more clear, so that they understand that we're, just by front loading everything and our expectations, we're not saying, so that's it. No more discussion. This is what I expect. This is how it should go. Front loading is a kindness. It also makes our lives easier, but it is a kindness to sit, to sort of set them up for success. We want to make things easier for them, or as much as possible, to lay that out. But I think now the front loading has to come with all kinds of extra conditions that front load. This might be difficult. We might find this, we need to check in with each other every other day, or we need to do these sorts of things. But just because these are the expectations that we've all agreed upon, doesn't mean the discussion is closed.
That's right. Exactly. And in my head, I was like, loading always worked, and people would feel so good. Yes. Oh, thank you for letting me know. Right. I could feel the pressure in the room when I would front load just dissipate. And this summer, I just felt the pressure stay. It just remained. And I was like, no, now we all feel better, right? Everybody? No? What's happening? I recognize your faces. I don't recognize the energy in the room. And I think also in some ways, for some of us, we're working for how many months to get this summer going, and very focused on the campers and the staff. And working with the government and working with public health, all of the things, and changing the plans over and over and over. And so our front load also was, we don't know what is going to happen, but we'll be transparent. And I think walking in part, I'd said this before the summer, you can't run the marathon and your finish line be the start of camp. Like and I think that's what a lot of as camp directors, that's what we had to do. But I think I had perhaps a very subconscious, I don't want to say chip on my shoulder, but I kind of was like, I did all of this. I'm here. Okay, team, let's do this. And like, we're going to do this together. And I lightly forgotten that this group is constantly on the precipice of, I don't know what's going to happen. And even though I was keeping them updated, their schools were keeping them updated and their families were keeping them updated, but they had no control. And so when I got sort of negative reactions in my head, my first initial reaction was like, do you know how much work this was for me to bleeping put this all together? Yeah. I quickly shooed that thought away so that I could look at them and see, okay, what is actually happening here? But there's, I guess a part of me was like, oh, I did this. And I almost sort of let go a little bit, like, okay, now we can just run camp. And that was absolutely not the case,
Do you think a camp job is less appealing to young people now? Maybe it has been in 2020 if camps were able to run, and certain 2021 than it has been before. That sort of idea of coming to camp and having that great camp experience. I mean, is that one of the reasons that has changed? Is that one of the reasons that directors were finding it difficult to hire enough people?
I think again, it's this, society at every level. We're talking corporate level. Some of my alumni who are running huge, corporate organizations, they're just going through staff members so quickly. I think there's a general high dissatisfaction that is going on how people are treated. But I think there's also just a big anger and frustration when you don't have control. And I think people are over being understanding. And I think for the majority of the part, people are understanding, but they're over understanding that they can't go to their graduation. They're over understanding that they can't go see their friends, go on their senior trip, see their grandparents. Like, they're over it. And I think we're inheriting that anger and frustration. That being said, I think there was relief for a lot of staff members this summer to be in a outdoors with people, for those of them that were outdoors, doing something different. But I do, if we look at our emotional, mental side, it's so hard to quantify what that is, what that looks like. But I can tell you that our staff in the first week, the amount of people that complained that their legs hurt from walking. And interesting. And I just like to look at that as a little bit of a comparison on maybe how people were feeling emotionally and mentally drained. It's so taxing. It was such a taxing year and a half. But just, and these are young individuals that usually are on sports teams and, walk to school, but they're just stuck at a desk in their bedroom for that amount of time. So I think a lot of stuff is going on, and people are kind of like, I don't want to work. This sucks. I'm out.
Right.
And I get it.
And so we've highlighted a lot of these today. Don't panic. Part 2, we're going to talk about what to do about them, but we want to really sort of dive into some of the why behind what we think has been happening in the industry. I think one of the biggest issues is that we don't simply pay them enough for what we ask of them. And I realize this is a sweeping generalization, and that there are camps out there who pay at least minimum wage. But in my experience, many camps, especially sleepaway camps who provide room and board, do not properly compensate their staff financially for what they're worth or for all the hours that they work in a week. And I've told Gab this story before, but when I was a first-year counselor in 1980, I received $1 a day. And at the end of a 10-day
Gasp.
program,
I am gasping.
and this was a sleepaway camp. So the end of the day was like 24 hours, right? So at the end of a 10-day program, I got a crisp $10 bill, which I remember the director would sit at this little table and open up the cash box, and all the first years lined up, and we all got a $10 bill. And they would get it from the bank, ahead of time to pay us. And I would promptly spend my $10 on my day off that day in town, and which at that time got me dinner, a movie, and ice cream after the show, $10. My second year counseling, I received a 100% raise, and I made $2 a day. So Gab said she was gasping. This does seem ridiculous when I say it out loud, even 40 years later, but we didn't think twice about it. Mm-hmm. I had great summers and I had all the money that I needed. So here's the thing. In 1980, my entire university tuition plus books was $750. And I received a scholarship, so I paid only for my books, which my parents covered. So camp was my spending money for the summer. I didn't have to save it for anything. And as a counselor back then, I had two responsibilities: help the kids have fun and keep them alive. Seriously, that was the expectation. Make sure they're alive at the end of the 10 days when their parents come and pick them up. Now, think of all of the things that we ask of our staff. In this century, on top of helping kids have fun and, of course, staying alive, they're also expected to teach leadership skills, understand how to build resiliency, help kids with self-confidence, help campers who have anxiety, ensure that all kids of all backgrounds and all genders feel comfortable and safe. They need to have the necessary skills and quals to lead hardcore activities. They need to be prepared for when a child discloses abuse. I mean, I can go on and on and on, and we all know what these things are. But most of us require all of these things and much more of our staff, and we're unable to pay them enough to even cover the cost of tuition, which has skyrocketed in Canada over the last 10 years. And I can't even begin to fathom how American students pay for tuition. Or they need to cover all the costs of all the other expenses that they may have. So for me, if you have struggled this past year or two with finding enough or keeping enough staff, I think now is the time of year to really go over your staff hiring budget. Do some research this fall. What are camps who successfully have enough staff paying? What are they paying them? Make comparisons between camps, ones that maybe offer a similar program to yours, ones that differ. Can you call up staff that you trust from this past summer and ask, what amount of money would make this workable for you? What would allow you to remain in camping as long as you would like, and get their input? I mean, we say this as many times as we say front load. Get the input from your staff. Ask around. How do other camps make it work? What other things do they offer to make working at camp appealing, even though it may not be a financial item? Are there grants that your organization can apply for to help pay better salaries? What I would start with is throw everything out, all your numbers out on your budget, figure out exactly how much you want to or should pay your staff, put that into a working budget for 2022. And it's probably going to give you a bit of a heart attack. But what changes can you then make to get yourself back in the black? Do you have to hire less staff? And if so, what changes do you need to make to your camper experience so that all the staff that you do hire are not expected to fill all of the roles of the summer from this past year? Do you have to remove other items from the budget or decrease spending in certain areas to be able to put a bit more into staffing? Do you have a program area that's a really big expense for you? For example, do you offer horseback riding, or do you have a fleet of sailboats, or are you trying to put in a high ropes course? Are these big price tags required to fulfill your mission? And the answer may be yes, and that's great. But we've talked many times about the fact that you can run a great camp in a parking lot if you have the right people to lead with you. So if relationships and all those 21st century skills that campers, grown-ups want us to teach their kids, if those are our primary focus, Can we, or do we need to fade out some bigger ticket items in order to have the right staff leading the charge? And as you build your budget, make sure that you put into place an increase in staff salaries every year to compensate for inflation. I know many camps whose pay scale hasn't changed in 10 or 20 or more years.
Mm-hmm.
And it simply isn't workable for our summer staff anymore. So we need to seriously put thought into this now. Maybe take some time to talk to professionals outside of camping. How do they compensate staff? What other benefits do their staff receive that can make this work possible? I would even put together a task force whose job it is to help you come up with some solutions to this problem. Are there parents or alumni who do this for a living and could offer you some advice? I think having some parents or alumni or donors know how hard staff work and how they may struggle to keep coming back because they need to make ends meet is really healthy. This kind of transparency says that we know it's an issue and we're working to find the best possible solution for camp because our people are what's most important. So I would take the time now to really think it through. Maybe you need to come up with like a 3-year plan to raise salaries bit by bit each year. And I would communicate this with my staff, let them know that we're doing all that we can, that we know they're worth far more than we can ever pay them, but we're putting our thinking caps on and we're doing all we can to make it just and fair and feasible for everybody. And one last point on this particular topic for me anyway, is what are we role modeling to our staff when we don't pay them well? Do they feel like we're undervaluing their work? Do they think that we're suggesting that child development isn't worth paying for? What is their takeaway when they come to our website to apply and they see the pay scale? And I know budgets are getting tighter and tighter, and there are more and more expenses every year. But for me, I feel if we don't put our money into the leadership, then we can have all the amazing toys and program areas we want, but we're not going to be able to run them. It's time to shift our thinking, and we just can't go on like we used to. If we don't pay our staff better, it'll be harder and harder to find people willing and or able to do the job. And it often is not because they don't love camp. Most of them want to return year after year after year, but they simply can't afford it. So I think now when we start to think about putting out those applications for next year, it's the time to really reflect on some serious changes. Gab, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I think our staff are it's not enough to just get an experience and learn leadership at camp to be paid forward. I think we have to show our staff we're not taking advantage of them and they're asking us to do better. And I think that showing that this is a priority and that you're moving towards that direction and you're involving them in the conversation is a really big step. And I know that there's already camps that are doing this. I know that camps have been doing, there's some camps that have been doing this for a long time. Yes. But I also know within our industry, that's sometimes not always the priority. And we sometimes get lost in, we're doing this for the children, therefore our staff are sort of the, casualties of that philosophy. Mm-hmm. All of the people that work with us, whether they are clients or they are employees, are part of our community. And we have to look at it that way. And so, just shifting our mindset to that as a priority that's the most important. That's the first step. And that's worth a lot. And then following through with it. And I'll say, personally, this is something that my organization has been working on since we purchased our camp, and it is not easy. No. And I'm constantly struggling with trying to figure out how to make sure that this organization is a strong, solid organization in 20 years from now. And I still come up with, it feels like impossibilities. But like what you were talking about, Beth, let's not do this alone. Reach out to your alumni. Let's see what kind of fundraising we can do solely for staff salaries, what kind of partnerships we can build, mm-hmm. and et cetera, and see, who is available to help push this mission forward, because it's necessary if we want these organizations to be sustainable in the future.
Great. Thanks, Gab. Now, before we continue, we just want to give a shout out to our amazing sponsor. Hey friends, do you remember your why for getting into camping in the first place? I'm guessing it didn't involve sitting in front of a computer screen, clicking in a database. Sometimes all the busy work and button clicking associated with running camp keeps us from seeing why we are there. That's why we encourage you to get to know our friends at UltraCamp. UltraCamp helps you get back to spending time remembering why you love working at camp. How do they do this? UltraCamp takes the stress out of using their registration software. With UltraCamp, you don't have to worry about limits. UltraCamp offers unlimited custom reports, unlimited support, unlimited training, unlimited users. And if you think this all sounds too good to be true, friends, it is real. Visit ultracampmanagement.com/campcode. Our friends at UltraCamp would love to show you a future where you finally have time to get back to what's really important, running camp. Visit their website, ultracampmanagement.com/campcode, and set up a time to chat. Okay, we're back, Gab.
Yeah.
So we've talked a bit about all the things our staff is feeling, needing, yearning for, really scrambling to try to put together to be able to come to camp and may not feel like they can these days.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that we can do with our daily programming to help staff feel more supported, to help them feel like we're not expecting them to do everything 23 hours a day or 8 hours a day if you're a day camp or something like that? What are things that you've done at Waro to kind of ease things a little bit?
Well, so one of our big things is we're, unplugged, as unplugged can be. We do have speakers and microphones, but we certainly don't show, campers aren't encouraged to bring cameras to camp. We have photographers around taking pictures. When I say photographers, I mean staff members with phones that are not Wi-Fi, because phones are great image captures these days. That's what we have. So we take a whole bunch of that and, we send it to the families. And so it can really have our campers disconnect. But this summer, I knew that we needed to give our staff some, what I like to call brain breaks, where they're maybe present, but don't need to engage very, very much. And so we did a drive-in movie night once a session. And that came from Nara Stockwell from Camp Taiwan. And she just said to me, listen, you just have to do whatever it takes to, make your staff, like, give them breaks. Basically, you have to do whatever it takes to just ease the pressure off of them. And this went against what we typically do, but this movie night was very special. We changed the movie every session. So then those staff members that did want to stay and watch could, but also staff members could just leave and have their own time to themselves. And we had a skeleton staff stay behind. And we had popcorn, and it was really, really cute, and it was quite lovely. But, it's something that I never say never, because you never know, but that's one of the things I never thought we would be doing at Waro. And, just those type of things. And for next year, we're really looking at seeing what alumni can come and support our staff so that staff members can have more time off in the day, more evenings off. And that would be their simple role, would just to give people time off and breaks and just breathing space so that they can do what they need to do.
And I do think for many of us, especially when we say we run intentional summer camps, we take real pride in that. And so every single moment is planned and organized and thought through, and of course, front loaded and all of those things. And that has often made us who we are and gets kids coming back year after year and staff coming back year after year. But I think there is a shift in that where we're realizing that we are over programming, that we are overstimulating, that we are doing too much. And that may change again in years to come. But right now, I think having these brain breaks is a positive thing for everybody, not just for the staff, but for the kids as well. Just especially after a year like we've had, to have some evenings or afternoon times or whatever it happens to be where they're not on all the time, where they can just kind of chill, but still be together.
Exactly. And, and it's sometimes easier said than done. And in philosophy, it's a great philosophy, but also how do you set your campers up for that too? We have we always have, that free time for our campers that we protect so that they have that experience. And this summer, because we were in pods, our staff had to stay with their campers, and our staff by instinct were just entertaining them during this time. And I kept stepping in and saying, can stop, just let them do them, and you do you. Take out a book if you want. They have a nice zone. They can do whatever they want. They can come and hang out with you. And I try to just sort of say it is okay. But that was ridiculous, because I didn't teach my staff how to just let the campers be during that time. Usually in our other programs, there was different stations and the campers could come and go. But because they were right with them, they had this knee-jerk reaction that they had to, and they weren't comfortable with letting their campers just sort of quote unquote be bored, or they're anxious, they would get home lonely. And in my head, I was like, that was an unrealistic expectation of me. I haven't even supported our campers on how to do that. So, we shifted our program for me to meet with our campers and brainstorm what they could do during this time. And what do you do with staff members just during this time? You can go and hang out with them and chit chat with them. But, if you want to go play tetherball, they can sit there and read their book, and that's okay. And it's just downtime. Like, my two best friends have 3-year-olds right now, and they're practicing this at home, like, a little bit of downtime for their kid. And it's an effort to put in. And we have to, set our camps up for that. Like, how do we follow through with some of this stuff, I think is also part of the planning that we can put in this year.
Great. And we'll talk more about that in our follow-up episode.
Exactly.
When I was directing, our staff worked 23 hours a day. I mean, yes, they could sleep at night, but especially our counselors who slept in the cabins with the campers were expected to be on call. So could you work that many hours a day with only 1 hour off? I think for me, it was what I grew up with. So I just continued it. And I thought, oh, well, they're young. They can handle it. I handled it. Most of us can't do this anymore due to all of the things that we've been highlighting today, but also because looking back on it, it was completely unfair to expect them to. So now is the time to take a look at your summer schedule. How can you revamp things to allow staff to have maybe 2 hours off a day if you're a sleepaway camp? So maybe 1 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon, or maybe 1 in the evening. Or are there ways you can give them an evening off or 2 through the week that's not their formal day off? So Gab's movie night is one, but what other things could you do? How can you make this time restful and reinvigorating for them as well if they have some of this extra time off? And again, I'd go back to my people who were on staff this past summer. Ask them, what do they need in terms of time off or wellness breaks? And do they need more snacks? Do they need Wi-Fi? Do they need lifeguards so that they can take a canoe out for an hour? Do they need a quiet place to nap, or a place to paint or draw or journal, or a room where they can play board games with others who have their break at the same time? So you likely offer some of these things already, but ask them, have them brainstorm now so that you can figure out which ideas you can implement next summer. Do you need to think about hiring floaters who will support these extra hours off? So Gab is talking about having alumni come in. That's a great thing, because alumni often want to come and volunteer their time and give back to camp and just be there for a while. But can you afford to put this into your budget? Who can step in and take the place of that person having their hour off? And maybe you could rotate these floaters with program staff members. So, for example, they might teach canoeing and kayaking for 7 weeks of the summer and be a floater for one. This kind of thinking is going to take a lot of organizing. So again, we suggest don't do it alone. Get the input of your staff or your alumni or other directors in the camp community and see how they're doing that. Do you have to put in some more supports for your staff? Do you already have a head counselor or unit heads? And if not, should you? Do you need someone who's there to care for your staff and their needs and concerns? Someone who can be available all day to chat with staff? Maybe you have a social worker or a grad student or somebody who's getting their PhD in psychology or a therapist or a team of them who work with you each summer, or like they each do it for a week each summer. And these could be some of your alumni that come back and spend a week as the staff caretaker. Having somebody available solely for the purpose of caring for your staff would be invaluable. And if you don't have that person and it falls to you, you let me know how you're going to figure out how to do that and all the other things that you have to do as a camp director. Because as the director, you don't always have the time to drop everything to be a sounding board or a listening ear. But what if you had somebody on staff whose sole job was just to do that? And I think this would be a great role for alumni who might like to come and be at camp for a week, that sort of thing. It could be more of a cost up front. Yes, if you have to hire an extra staff person, but it could save a lot of grief. It could actually save your camp. So be transparent with your thinking as you're going through all of this, your why, your planning ideas. And of course, you want to make sure that you front load your changes with your people across as many different avenues as possible. Let your parents know how much you value staff and all their hard work and explain those reasons behind any changes, and do the same, of course, for your returning staff and future staff. I think now's the time to try to get creative with these types of solutions. Think outside the box a little bit. We can make, for example, a list of all the needs of our people, our staff members, and then a list of how the heck are we going to meet these needs, and sort of try that out. And I think thinking them through in October rather than next April, when you realize you don't have enough staff applications, or you don't have enough people coming to camp, or you're having too many people struggling to commit to coming to camp for the summer. Now is the time to get through some of that thinking rather than trying to do it 6 months from now.
Yeah. And for me, and it's possible, I think it is possible. When I was a staff member, we would have 1 day off 1 week and a half day off the next week. And that's just what we did. And then I think around when I was 20, that's when Jackie shifted it to, you got a day off every week. And, us that, we're used to the half day off. We're like, well, how's this going to be even possible? Can we even do this? Like, is this, how are we going to have enough staff? And it took creative scheduling is what it really was. And obviously now we'd never go back. And there's certain things that by asking your staff, they will enlighten you on things that are tough, and they might even have some great solutions. And, this summer I had planned to bring in Natasha, who is somebody that's worked at Waro for many years. She's a brilliant teacher in high school right now, and she takes care of always updating our educational area at camp and training our staff. And I'm just so grateful to have her, and our staff really appreciate her. And she comes always for staff training and then checks in throughout the summer. And so this summer she said, I'll be there for all of staff training. And I said, and I can have her for about 2 weeks every year. That's her time at Waro. And I said, no, could you come in at the very end of the first session? Because I'd like you to meet with the staff and see how everything's going and what changes we need to do. And I'm so grateful that happened, because I think with the shifts and the chaos of just getting COVID camp, affectionately called by my staff, there were some things that had slipped through the cracks. And so there was frustration. But all of the requests that they asked were so ridiculously reasonable. and so easy to adjust. And it was just things that I hadn't thought of. I'm not in their shoes. I'm not of their generation. And if you can facilitate having somebody that's not necessarily just yourself to communicate with your staff so that they can be a little bit more transparent, because they care about you too, and they don't want to hurt your feelings as much as you try to build a trust. It's hard to build a trust with a large group of staff members, and facilitate that conversation, hold that space, and you might be able to do some immediate shifts that might not even be low, might not even be a cost at all. It's just scheduling and adjusting and shifting so that it, to show that we value them.
Great. And I think that now is the time for us as camp directors to sort of let go a little bit, think a little differently, be okay with change. As an industry, we always talk about developing and growing, but I also find we don't do well with change. We want to hold on to the past and the way things were because we value rituals and traditions and all that kind of stuff. But I think we need to seriously dig deep this fall and do some real thinking and think about creative changes that we might be able to make this better for our staff, but then also easier on ourselves as we're trying to hire and maintain staff and help lead them.
Yes. And I think to push that a little further, as well as, we're looking at schedules and finances. I think also as camp individuals, we might be looking at our staff, our employees as all one and the same. And I think we have to acknowledge the pressure and the difficulty and the mental tax it is to be, part of the BIPOC community or the LGBTQ A+ community. And what kind of environment are we creating? What kind of allowances are we shifting? How are we building equity within our organization and not treating everybody exactly the same, because it's not the same. And, one of my dear friends who's Black, and she'd be very happy if I shared this, would text me some mornings and say, I just want to call in Black because it's hard being Black today. And I just don't want to come to work. How are we adjusting to create support, for our individuals that are at our camp that have that extra mental weight that is that they have to lift every single morning when they get out of bed, every single time maybe they don't feel included, just in general. How are we shifting that? And I think opening up our gaze a little bit more to see how can we make things different for everybody, but also understand who everybody is.
Great. So the fall of 2021.
Yes.
A season of reflection.
Season of reflection. Yeah. And action.
Well, the action comes later.
That's right. Exactly.
All right. Gab, are you up for a recap?
I think so. I mean, all right. I actually haven't even, but we will see what's in the bank. I just got into our conversation, Beth, and I just loved it so much. Okay. Let's see. How do we recap the past year and a half and the impact that it has had on our staff? Well, that is not easy and not actually possible. We have to acknowledge that today things are different and there's pressure on everyone. And some people hold more pressure and blockades than others. And as camp, industry members and leaders and professionals and people that just try to do better every single day, we have to acknowledge that we need to shift what is happening behind the arches of our organization. And we can do that by first listening and asking our staff what they need, what they want. And the chances is that it might be quite reasonable. In other aspects, we also have to look at prioritizing our staff members. And yes, that comes in finance. And I know that is difficult for camp professionals because a lot of us did not get into this industry because of finance. We got into this industry because of people. But guess what? Our staff are our people, and we have to put them first. I know as a camp industry, it is very difficult these days to be doing all of the things, raising our campers, teaching our parents, and leading our staff. Our role is to listen and then put things in action. We can do better because we are the industry that shows the world how it should be done.
And there's nothing more to say. That is Gabrielle's soapbox, and it's brilliant.
There you go.
All right. And before we wrap up with our best practice from Gab this week, here's how you can connect with us and get involved in the conversation. So join us using the hashtag Camp Code and let us know any topics you'd like us to discuss, any guests that you recommend we talk to, and any great leadership training tips that you have to share with us. We would love to hear from you. As you know, we're all about sharing in this industry. If you have found this podcast to be useful, then we'd love it if you could leave us a rating and a review in your podcasting app. Your feedback does help keep the show going. And we love our reviewers so much that if you post something wonderful about us, we will be happy to share it. And here is how you can get in touch with each of us if you'd like to speak to one of us. So Gab, how can they find you?
Well, you can follow me on Instagram at Gabrielle Rail. Rail takes 2 L's, or you can contact me at info@waro.com, OUAREAU.com.
Thanks, Gab. I'm Beth at gocamp.pro. I'm on Instagram as topaz_fae, F-A-E, and on Twitter as Topaz, at Topaz. So for our next podcast, it's going to be part 2. So how do you pay for this so you don't wind up paying for this? Is now that we've talked about how to better compensate our staff and change up some ways that we can run our summer programs, we want to dive into how we can make changes to leadership training to ensure that we have enough staff and that they not only stay all summer, but actually thrive in our care.
Mm-hmm.
Our final segment on each podcast is, of course, our best practice for leadership training. And again, we would love to hear some of yours and to share your most effective tips. And again, you can tell us what they are using that hashtag Camp Code. And this week, Gabs has a best practice for us.
And it's more of an anecdote. And it's, I work with Jackie, who's my mother, and I always learn from her. And as Travis has said about Jackie, she's truly a quiet leader. I'm somebody that stands on stage. I'm somebody that will, bring people in. She will really lead from behind. And this summer, so many of us, a lot of unexpected behaviors occurred this summer, including from parents. And we had a young 9-year-old who was very self-aware about her feelings and how she was experiencing things. And she was in that place of angoisse, of pain, I would say, where she moved from being home lonely to homesick. And we have a policy that once, campers are emotionally distressed, we need to send them home. And it doesn't happen very often. And we don't take that lightly, but this is where this camper was. And the reaction from the parent, which I've never experienced before, was absolutely not. She's staying. She needs to learn resiliency. I had our camp doctor speak to this parent. This parent was very clear that she was a professor of at university, and that she's leads and teaches a lot of people that are the same age as our staff members, and had said, these individuals do not have resiliency. My daughter will not turn out like that. She needs to learn how to be uncomfortable. Everything that she was saying, I understood, but truly her daughter was in distress. And I have to give props to that camper, because we did let them talk on the phone, and the parents were asked all of the questions. How are your counselors? How are your campers? How's the food? How's the program? This kid could have thrown us under the bus, and she could have said, my counselors are horrible. I hate that. She said, everybody is wonderful. The food is fantastic. I would rather, though, hurt myself so that I could go home, because at least I'd only be in physical pain and not in emotional pain.
Oh.
So she was a very self-aware. And, what I can take from this is that this parent was stressed and struggling and concerned as well. I feel like she was a very smart individual, but myself and the camp doctor could not convince the parent to come pick her up. And so we had to go to the big guns, which was Jackie. And so Jackie did talk to her. And I overheard part of the conversation. And she asked this individual, do you watch the news? And of course she answered yes. And she said, the world is not doing very well. And I know what my future is going to be. It's going to be okay for me. When I pass away, the world is going to be all right. When you pass away, the world's going to be all right. But your daughter does not know what the future entails, and your students do not know what the future entails. It is very scary right now. Neither of us can pretend like we know what they're feeling and what they are experiencing. It is very unknown. And so our role right now is to listen, learn, and support. And right now, the best thing that we can do for your child is to listen. And then that's going to open the door for learning, which will lead us to support. That's what we have to do. And I think our staff, that's where they're at. And I think that we do have to look at resiliency, but we have to understand that some of us, depending on where you are in your age, I'm Gen X. I do not know what Gen Z is going through. I don't know what the younger millennials are going through, but I have a role to listen, learn, and support. And this summer for me, my staff have put me through the ringer before. I'm used to that. But in past summers, some of those staff members that have done that to me, I've, taken it with a grain of salt, or they just don't come back because that's just the way it is. And there we go. This summer was the toughest summer, and my staff did have words with me and did put me through the ringer. But there's not one staff member that I don't care about, love, or feel regretful that I had on my property. And that's because they are struggling, and I have the opportunity to listen, learn, and support. And I feel very grateful for that. So, it's more of an anecdote, but if you feel a little bit lost and you're not quite sure what to do, that's because we don't know. and we have to keep learning so that we can keep, doing what we can to support our younger generation.
Wise words from a very wise woman. Thanks, Jackie, through Gab. So that wraps things up for today. Camp Code is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network, and you can check out all our other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. And let me tell you, there are some amazing people with very wise advice. So look up all those other podcasts and give them a listen. Ruby, we missed you, and we look forward to you coming back. From all of us here at Camp Code, take care of you, and thanks for the listening, friends. Too many things. Hold on. There we go.